Welcome everyone, and welcome to another episode of Short Stories with Friends. I've got my guest Fred Cubberly with me. He is a returning guest because he's just come out with a couple more books, and we want to talk about that. If you remember last time he was on here, he is a wine and bourbon connoisseur and has just really good stories. As a matter of fact, it was pretty much the first time we had an episode go on for like an hour and a half. So, and a lot of our viewers really enjoyed that discussion we had last time. So we're going to kind of check in with what he's been doing. Then also, he's going to help me read my short story, Fading Painting. So let's go ahead and get to the intro, and then when we get back, we're going to see what he's been up to this last few months. All right, we are back. Fred, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's good to be back, Tony. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, when you reached out to me and said that you're about ready to finish up your next and possibly last book.
Yes.
I don't know if he's got the bug. We'll have to go out and see. But I think when the ball really starts to roll on these books, I think he's going to be back in action. So, he's going to join me again. He joined me a few months ago. We talked about, what was the first book?
The first book was Tasting 501 at the Century Bar.
Right, which is, if you're not from Dayton, that's a local, well-known bourbon bar. And they have like a lot of high-end bourbons. I mean, they're stuff you can't even really get in a lot of liquor stores around here. So it's a really, really nice place. And you did 501?
And I did 501, and I described them, and I wrote up other things about them. And what's interesting right now tonight, we're starting off with a little bourbon, even though we're going to talk about wine in a little bit. And this is James E. Pepper 1776 straight bourbon, 100 proof. And what's interesting about this is that it's owned by a guy named Amir Pay. And some people pronounce it P, but it's actually Pay. Mm-hmm. And Amir owns it, and he's a descendant of a guy who fought in the Revolutionary War. And of course, for our side, for General Washington. And Austin Peay University is named after one of his ancestors. So the fact that he was a history nut and collected information about this particular brand and then bought the rights to it and now produces is fantastic. He produced it down in Lexington. So it's a very nice bourbon, and
that's what we're drinking tonight.
Enough of a free advertisement for him.
I recently added that to my collection, so of course when he comes over, I'm like, listen on some of the new bourbons I've got it added in there. So as soon as you hear that, it's like, oh, start telling me the story. I'm like, you're telling me that, you're going to say it again when we get back on the show. I tell you, that's one thing you really enjoyed about having you on last time, is that just the wealth of knowledge you have, and the history and the stories that you had to tell. And now, speaking of which, last time you had mentioned that you were finishing up or working on the next book, which is the Sayings of My Father.
Yes, I've finished that one up, and then also the other one,
Wine Country Stories. So let's talk about the first one first. Because that's the one you kind of mentioned in the last one. Tell us a little bit about how the inspiration behind this, and what's this book about.
So what I'd like to do is, first of all, if you can see it, the book is yellow. Why is it yellow? Well, because that's my father's favorite color. And if you would look inside and you look at the foreword section, I'm not going to read it to you, but I'll tell you a little bit about it. I say in there, hey, look, I am not an expert. I am not a psychologist. I'm not a socialist that knows how to deal with all these kind of people and events and stuff. I'm not a celebrity know-it-all, so I don't feel that I have the right from that perspective to tell you things that are wrong. As they often do, sorry. But I'm just a guy who's lived 70 years, and along the way I've picked up a few things that I think are helpful. And so I've written a book, and it's Sayings of My Father. Truth of the matter is that most of the sayings weren't by my father. They were mine.
Really?
But the reason why I put that is when I was a young guy, and I'd say, hey, by the way, here's something we ought to think about. People didn't pay attention. Mm-hmm. But as a young guy, if I said, my father always said, yep. And then I would say what I want to say, all ears were attuned to it.
Yep.
Because it had that respect for the older generation back then. So at any rate, I put this together, and what it is, it's a book that has the sayings. Then I tell a story either from my own life, many cases, almost in every case I have one of those, and also maybe a history tale. And then I also, believe it or not, put in Bible verses that back it up.
Very nice.
So that's this book. If you don't mind, I'll just mention a couple.
Oh yeah, I saw you had a
things.
couple tags in there, so absolutely.
Yeah, I've got them in here.
Let me tell you, that's one thing we really enjoyed last time you were here too, is that you'd read some of the takes from his books and stuff, and that's probably the best advertisement right there, is hearing him read his own work. He's definitely got the voice for it, but it's always interesting. So please,
I'll do it.
Let's see what you got.
Well, this first one's really simple. My father always said, never argue with a fool. Others won't know who's who. Excuse me, and that's so true. And what I put down here is my sentence here is, have you ever been witness to two people wildly arguing and shouting? Which one is right? Which one is wrong? Which one is wise? Which one is not? Or do they both look like they're fools yelling at each other? And if you read Proverbs 26:4, you will find, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be just like him yourself.
Yep.
So that's one that I always remember. Sometimes I get caught up in it anyway, but nonetheless, I try not to. Would you like to read one of my stories?
I can, yeah. It's only fair I keep making my guests come on and read.
This one could be controversial, so please, please, please listen to the whole story. And this is something that you would do as a last resort, but nonetheless,
Okay.
right there.
All right. Read all the way to here?
Yeah,
Okay.
if you can.
All right. History is full of bullies. One of the situations that stands out is prior to World War II, when Hitler had come to power in Germany. He clearly was looking to conquer much of Europe, all the Germanic areas, ports to the west in France and elsewhere, and space to grow in the east, Poland, Ukraine, and Russia in particular. He even wrote about this while he was in prison for his beer hall revolt in Bavaria. The book Mein Kampf detailed his plans. Yet after a bloodless retaking of former German industrial areas lost during World War I and marching into the annexed Austria, he declared that all he wanted was the Germanic half of, you got a lot of big words, Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
Luckily I know most of these places.
Yes.
I'm swearing these are big words. And even though this was a sovereign and independent country, Neville Chamberlain, Prime Minister of England, appeased him, gave in to the bully, by approving Germany's takeover of half the country. In return, he received Herr Hitler's promise that he had no further territorial ambitions, and thus this would be peace in our time. This only served to strengthen the bully, and unfortunately the rest in history, kind of starting to see the repeat in some of the current events.
Yeah, absolutely.
As for me personally, and this is him, I learned the lesson in the 4th grade. Before I cover the story, I will admit that many won't like what they read, and many feel strongly that this would not be a good way to go. However, it worked in my case, and thus I will share it with you. My family had just moved into a new town and a new school system as I was entering the 4th grade. The first day of school, as we left the school grounds, the ruling bully, Mike, approached me with 3 of his buddies. He was set on establishing his dominance over me the first day and started a fight. Well, to be truthful, he really got the best of me. When my dad got home from work, he noticed the bruises and asked if I had started a fight. This he would not condone. I said no. He then recited his rule on the subject and added a new one as follows. Never start a fight. 2, never run for one. The new one, bullies often must be confronted. So, he told me to follow Mike as he left the school grounds and punch him in the nose, which ignited a fight that resulted in about a draw. When he got home that evening, he told me to do it again the next day. So as I approached Mike the day after school, he took off running, saying that he was done with me, and I wasn't seriously bothered by bullies again throughout my school years. Oh, and now back to Hitler. His first aggression was to move into Rhineland area March 7, 1936, which had been taken from Germany as part of World War I reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. When Hitler ordered his generals to march, he also told them that if they met armed resistance from France and/or Britain, they were to retreat back into Germany. They bullied their way in and met no resistance. This served to embolden the bully Hitler something to ponder. One more thing that helps to make the point clear came to me last night while I was asleep. Pick up your Bible and read about Esther and Mordecai versus the bully, Haman, in the book of Esther. That's a really, really, really good story. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's one that I painfully remember. So another quick one, if you don't mind, out of this book. And ladies and gentlemen, eyesight at the computer for many, many days in a row and long days. I'm going to add a little light to this so I can see it a little better.
And just so you guys know, it's very lit on the screen there, but
it's
that's
not
because I
here.
have lit. It's not here. It's actually hard to read those words sometimes. I'm still working on that.
So this story says, if you don't have any stories to tell, you never lived. Where have you been? What have you done? Who have you met? What have you read or written? Have you found love? Do you have favorite pastimes or hobbies? Did you play sports? Were you in the band, or are you in a band? Have you been in a play? Do you enjoy art or gardening? Are you an expert on a subject? Are you passionate about something? If so, you have stories to tell. So tell them. Love life. Read about the lives of Moses and or King David and numerous others, from lowly to kings mentioned in the Bible. What stories could be and have been told. So my advice, my father's advice, would be very simple. Enjoy life, live life, remember what you did, have fun, and share it with others, because it'll encourage them to do the same.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. One is that I already forgot for the moment I was going to say it.
Yeah.
Now I have a shirt. It says, one I made. It says, "I'm a writer. I see stories everywhere."
Absolutely.
That's one of the passions that kind of get me to writing. Another thing I try to teach young writers too, as a life lesson is, be as interesting as the characters you create.
I like that.
I find like when I'm writing my stories and stuff, as a writer, they're part of, like, a lot of them are different parts of you. You have to put yourself in their shoes to kind of create and a lot of times, even though you write multiple characters, you kind of have to write from their points of view, and they're all parts of you. But a lot of writers kind of use that as they kind of push that into their stories, but they're, you got to think in real life.
Yes.
You are those characters. Try to be interesting as well. So when you look back at your life, at your story, that it was actually a pretty interesting and fulfilling one. Like, I think anybody who talks to Fred, like, he's on my show now, but when he's talking, walking around just talking, I just talked about, the Bourbon Day, talking about the history of that, just so full of knowledge. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
Because, the more, you learn to tell stories, the more that you've lived and have stories to tell, the more people really just want to be around you and listen, and that does inspire others to kind of like, hey, I need to go out and
get out and do it
and do more. So let's take a look at the second book. Now this one is Wine Country.
Yeah, Wine Country Stories. And before I do that, I want to give you a compliment, and it is this: when I write my books, I just have to get inside myself.
Mm-hmm.
When you write your books, you have to get inside the characters.
Yeah,
that's a lot more to do.
That's very true.
I really admire that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It kind of comes back from like. You started getting to, like everybody else in the late 90s, early 2000s, that went to the whole serial killer and criminal minds type thing. And one thing I learned from reading these books on, being a criminal profile and stuff, is that the best criminal profiles, the best detectives, are the ones that can get in the mind and think
like that,
like the criminal. And even cybersecurity now, people look at some of the things that I practice in ethical hacking, and now I'm getting the lock picking. It's like, why do you do that? It seems like that just should be wrong, but actually it helps me by understanding what tools and what they do that. So it's really benefited me being a writer, being able to get into those other characters and actually mentally put myself in from that other point of view.
And I'll share one with you. In that book, Sayings of My Father, one of the things I have in there is never offer a deal unless it benefits both parties.
Mm-hmm.
Now that doesn't mean you can't win the most, but they got to have something.
Right.
So you have to put yourself in their position and understand what they would want, what they're interested in, what makes a value proposition for them, and then you can speak to them about what you want because you're thinking about them as well.
Exactly.
And put it in something that frames it for them as well, and you win. So you're right on the money. No matter what you do, I guess you got to be able to do a little bit of that anyway.
Right, and because when you write your story and stuff, you know, you write it, but it can't just be, you know, a lot of times, I'm sure you let your wife read it and stuff, and you want to say, hey, so is this me talking, or is this something like a story I would want to read myself, or am I getting to the point to where he understands, in layman terms, is it interesting, is it, you know, flavorful, you know, because a lot of times as writers, you know, when you're writing, when you're in it, you think it's like, you know,
Yes.
great or crap, one of the two.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's nice because when you get that other perspective, and they're like, oh, no, this is actually really good, or this is a little more robotic here, you know, kind of learn
Then it
as
sounds
a writer.
It helps you out. It
Right.
does.
It's more like poetry than a dictionary.
Oh, and I love poetry.
All right.
So this book is called Wine Country Stories, and it's both lived and learned. And believe it or not, this was done over 45 years of visiting wineries, and it has 108 wine stories in it. I'd like to just go through the foreword with you quickly. It says, what a wine journey I've had the pleasure to be on. I say on because it hasn't ended yet and really has no end in sight. This journey has taken me, and most often my wife Debbie, to foreign countries, almost every state in the Union. Knowledge of culture, food, and history, as well as beautiful scenery, interesting people, and adventures have provided me with numerous stories to share, thus the book. Before I start the storytelling, let me say a special thank you to John Kay, a childhood and longtime friend. John introduced me to wine about 45 years ago. To better understand the story, John and I, although friends and often teammates in sports, were very competitive. I must say he was a much better basketball player than me. I was better at football, and we're both good at baseball. Later after college, John, while living in San Francisco, asked Debbie and I to come for a visit to explore the city. And we're going to visit Napa Sonoma wine country. When we visited and toured the wineries, John knew the process and the names of the various grapes. I knew nothing. When we departed, we planned a future trip in about 6 months. The plan was for Debbie and I, along with our 2 daughters, to join John touring San Francisco, camp at Yosemite, taste at some wineries, and hot air balloon over Napa Valley. That was great too. Being competitive, I decided that I would at least be wine competent when we returned. And it was this experience that started me on a 45+ year wine journey. So again, a truly heartfelt thank you to John. I've really loved and thoroughly enjoyed the journey. Oh, by the way, Debbie, my wife, was John's girlfriend during our early high school years. Looks like I won that competition too, and I'm 50+ years thankful for the win.
Well done. Well done.
Yeah. So
that will live on in history.
Couple quick stories. Oh, golly sakes. Man. So and I hope this isn't too boring or taking up too much time.
Oh,
if it
no,
is, just stop
please,
me. But,
yeah.
So the initial story says, first of all, let me set the record straight. This is not a formal rating of the absolute best wines or wineries. I will leave that to experts, Hugh Johnson, Jancis Robinson, and others. This is a book of storytelling. Stories that I have lived and or learned, as mentioned in the foreword, beginning a little over 45 years ago. Since then and up to this publishing, I have visited 876 wineries, now 892 by the way. Helped my local wine shop create a tasting club to experience wines from around the world, and tasted 498 different wine grape varieties, becoming one of the top 3 among the international club called New York City Wine Century Club's members. And it all started with that visit to Napa Sonoma, California. So let me tell the story from where it began. The hot air balloon flight, and then I'll quickly move on. So my wife Debbie and our young daughters Dana and Diane were visiting a friend of ours, John, in San Francisco, like I mentioned. After seeing the sights of the city by the bay, we headed to camp in Yosemite National Park for a couple of days, and then head over to Napa Valley for the hot air balloon ride over wine country. When we arrived at the park, it was dark, and when I say dark, it was so dark you could barely see. You couldn't even hardly see the next step as we parked the car and trudged off towards the camping area. It was colder than we anticipated, around 25 degrees Fahrenheit. But John brought 2 tents, a blanket by the way, and 5 sleeping bags. As we later discovered, because of the cold, there were very few campers. And because of the darkness, we weren't sure we were actually at the camping area when we set up our tents. John, his dog Cody, and our daughters took the very large tent and the blanket for them to share. Debbie and I got the very small pup tent and our own 2 sleeping bags. After looking for firewood to no avail, I decided to get into the tent and rest for the night. When I looked for my sleeping bag, and by the way, it's a pup tent, it wasn't much looking. When I looked for my sleeping bag, I discovered that Debbie had gotten into her bag and then squeezed it into my bag as well. I had no sleeping bag, no blanket, only a light jacket to keep me warm. It was 25 degrees and going down. I crawled in and started to zip up the tent opening to help keep the cold breeze out. Debbie, my wife, who was claustrophobic, stopped me. This prompted me to say, "Why don't you just go get our toothpaste and spread it all over my face so the bears will kill me quickly?" I got out of the tent, pulled a bottle of red wine out of my pack, and did somewhat warm me that night. The next morning, as the sun came up, I saw 2 beautiful sights. Half Dome, as it was a backdrop to our stage, and the best of all, a large stack of firewood that wasn't visible in the dark. A couple of minutes later, John emerged from his tent, asked if we wanted to get breakfast. "Of course I wanted a warm breakfast," I replied. He then pointed down towards the parking lot where we'd left the car and said, "Oh, we can drive a short distance to the Ahwahnee Lodge Hotel, world-class hotel." So I nearly froze to death. I'm not much of a camper to begin with, and I could have stayed in the Ahwahnee Lodge, a grand hotel. Nevertheless, off we went to Eggs Benedict and mimosas. After the fabulous breakfast, we headed back to camp and immediately built a warming campfire. The next morning we got up early as a light snow hit and headed to take the trail up and over Half Dome. As we approached, it was evident that the higher we moved, the deeper the snow. I expected the trail to be closed. It wasn't, as there were no closed signs at the trail kickoff point. My daughter Dana then said she really didn't feel like going. Debbie agreed, and I then walked them back to camp while John and my other daughter Diane set out on the trail. Before we actually headed back, we watched as they climbed the trail until they were far out of sight. Right then, the park rangers came and posted the sign, "Closed." Needless to say, we felt anguish and worry. I won't go through all of it, but they did make it back okay, which was fantastic. So anyway, I then talk about how we went on to the fly over Napa Valley, and I'm not going to go through all that with you. In the hot air balloon. Very that was nice. Really neat. So I've always wanted to do several things. One of them was hot air balloon over Napa. Not only do something, but do it in a certain place. Mm-hmm. And another one was to do skydiving. And I did that on my 40th birthday with my brother-in-law, and the training was 6 hours.
For skydiving?
Because when you went up...
It wasn't tandem?
It wasn't tandem. You did your own, and you had to pull your own cord.
Oh, wow, yeah, I can see that.
So this could be a story too. So anyway, part of the training was we had to get up on a ladder and jump backwards to practice a roll backwards.
Huh.
I did that, and when I did it, I landed on the back of my neck right here on a rock about that big. I found out later I broke the vertebrae in my neck.
Oh my God.
So I've got severe pain, can't hardly move. I'm with my brother-in-law who's also 40, and I know if I don't go up in the plane, he's going to make fun. So I went up and did my skydiving thing, and when I parachuted out, the chute wouldn't open.
Of course not. Fred, your stories would be interesting if the parachute open like it was supposed to.
So you're supposed to grab the cords and you're supposed to shake them like crazy. I told you what, I shook those things like a washing machine. I'm telling you.
Oh yeah, well, see the ground come up below you.
Oh, it's coming up close, and I'm thinking in the back of my head that damn little red truck supposed to pick us up ain't going to be there either. But anyway, finally I'm ready to pull the chute, cut it, and pull the reserve chute when boom, it opens, and the rest was okay. It worked out okay. So anyway, I
like that because when I did my parachuting, I did it in tandem.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, nothing is more like emasculating or makes you feel like a fat baby than being like strapped to a dude who's the real man and has the parachute. You got 4 clips to you, and I'm just gotta tuck myself in as he jumps out, and then as he falls, he's got the parachute, so I got 4 clips holding me in place. I'm just like worried that as soon as he pulls it, those 4 clips break, he's safe, and I just keep going. Yeah. And of course he does all the landing, so he's like, okay, bring your legs up, bring my legs up, and he's like, does all the landing, the running and stuff, and I just gotta sit there and be like, until the very end.
But you did it.
I know. I would like to have probably done the regular one, but I don't know. 6 hours of training for that, man.
It was kind of overkill, and it ended up being kill.
Because they had the other one with the rope where you jump out and then it automatically, rope cords for you after so far. So that's pretty. That's like that. It's pretty. I haven't done the hot air balloon though yet.
That's pretty cool.
I wanted to.
The hot air balloon is like being nowhere because you go at the speed of the wind. Not the speed of light, not the speed of sound, the speed of the wind. The only interesting part is when you come down.
Yeah.
Because the only way you come down is crash.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about it. So anyway, some of my other stories, I won't get into all of them in detail, but one speaking Italian with my hands. So I'll tell you the essence of that story. So we travel with another couple to Italy. It's their anniversary, and they're going to go back to his ancestral home in Italy, okay? And we land in Milan, and if you've ever been to Milan, all the roads go in big circles. We can't find our daggone way out. We got to find the highway called A1 and get out. So Jim had been telling us that he had been practicing his Italian for 2 years and had Italian pen pals, and he was going to be the guy to speak for us if nobody spoke English. So I felt pretty assured. So there we are stuck. He pulls over to the side of the road in Milan. There's a guy that's getting ready to get on his motorcycle. He goes up to the guy and he starts talking to him in Italian. The guy looked at him like he was speaking Greek. I let him talk for 15 minutes. Finally, I got out of the car. I walk up to the guy. I took our map with us. I point to our car. He shook his head yes. I point to Milan on the map. He shakes his head yes. I point to Florence, which Firenze as they call it, Florence, where we needed to go on the A1. And I pointed to our car, and he shook his head yes. Then I pointed to him and then his motorcycle, and I did this. He got on his motorcycle, took us straight to the A1 with directions there to go right to Florence.
Very nice.
Took about a minute and a half. So I guess it's true that Italians do speak with their hands.
That is, I've been to Italy, and actually where I stayed at was Montecatini Terme, right outside of Florence.
Yes.
And we had gone to Rome with my wife at the time, and we went to on the way back, pulled off the wrong exit. And so one thing to understand about when you go to any other country, really, if you get out of the main cities, no one speaks English. No. So I did learn, study a little bit before I left, and the most important, one you can learn is dove, which is where.
Yes.
And so all I had to do is like dove, Montecatini Terme,
yes.
That got me the right direction. Now the thing is that normally, like in the States, if someone says that way, you get on a highway like 70 or 75, and you go north or south or east or west. The problem with Italy is they love their roundabouts, and the roundabouts are never straight around and continue going forward. They're straight and then 2 roads going off.
Which one?
In which direction? So I did a thing. I kind of did what I learned in the Marines when you're like going when you're following a path in the woods. Is if you go around a tree this way to keep a straight line, you go around another tree. You go around the other way to kind of keep you somewhat on the straight course.
Perfect.
So pretty much every time I went on a roundabout, I go this way. Next one I come across, I make sure I
the other way.
That way. Eventually made it back, but yeah, it's. But one thing we learned at the restaurants and stuff, they're very.
Oh yeah.
Everything with the hands on that one.
Oh yeah. So one of the restaurants over there, the owner was a John Wayne fan. He wanted to have a shootout. He comes out with the Fanner 50 kids pistols like a Western,
right.
And cowboy hats, and So he and I had a shootout, and we got done. Everybody in the restaurant stood up and applauded. They thought it was a part of the show, I guess. I don't know. But that's another story I'll get into in here. Real quick, a couple other quick things. Oh, I love this one. I love this one. If it's not too long.
You're not going to need to buy the book because he's going to read all the stories.
I'm not going to read
They're
them all.
great stories. I love them all. We got these something for them to kind of salivate over.
I know.
So I tell you what, I can listen to this all. And last time we did that, it was like an hour and a half, and it was all like you were stuck to the screen the entire time because the stories are so interesting.
Well,
these stories are great.
Let me just tell you, I won't go through these stories, but let me just tell you a couple things. One of them is a CIA adventure, my CIA adventure. So when I was in Chile, the KGB thought I was the CIA guy who assassinated Allende. And I happened to arrive on the same plane with Pinochet, who was the right-wing guy who really had him assassinated. And so that was a fun little visit with them. So that's in the book. And I have, there's so many stories and there's so much fun. The cruise ship tasting, I'm not going to ruin it for you, but one of the couples with us, everybody was very athletic then, I was too, this is a number of years ago. As you can tell by my physique now, athleticism goes to writing books and playing golf with a cart.
The wine and bourbon does catch up with you.
It does. So the cruise ship tasting, though, we won all the events on the cruise ship, won everything. And one of the ladies wanted to go to a wine tasting on the cruise ship, which was a competition, which we won, to try to figure out what wines they were serving. And she's very beautiful, still is, and she was the physical training director for the Cincinnati Bengals.
Ah, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
that is pretty cool.
So I'll let you figure out how I won that, okay, and how we won it. But
it is the Bengals, so
yeah, what can I say?
That might be a clue.
Another story is about finding Santa Claus's house. I found Santa Claus's house for real. It's in the book. Another one is actor Tony Curtis. You might know his daughter, but nonetheless, where I met him and what happened. Another one was when I met a winemaker and owner of a winery who was a Holocaust survivor who almost drowned on the way here because his boat was hit by a Nazi submarine torpedo. And anyway, he's thrown in jail. We won't get into the whole story, but he passed away. But we had promised we'd go back and see him, and we didn't know he passed away. And when we got there, it was owned by the Disney executive that was in charge of all their movies. And he had just gotten back from England, and when he was over there, he had some ridiculous number like XYZ7 or something, and he had to come up with a name. And he heard a Roy Orbison song called Pretty Woman, and he decided to name the movie Pretty
I think I've heard that song before.
Yeah.
I can't remember where.
Yeah.
It was in a movie or something.
It probably was. So anyway, there's just tons of stories in here. I do want to, I'll let you read the last one here. It's not the last, but the last one I'll read here. It's called Don't Do It.
No, don't do it.
Don't do it.
I have a feeling that we're going to need like a second episode at some point too, because I tell you, all these stories just sound so fascinating. And while you do want to, support them by buying the book and stuff, it's just, you can't beat, the behind the scenes when he's reading and stuff that kind of went into the story. Stories are great, but when you actually like hear the writer live in them and actually, emphasizing certain parts and kind of going off and talking about some of the different things, it really makes it, really brings it to life.
Thank you.
All right, don't do it. Well, certainly celebrate the new year and anniversaries and anything else you can. However, I have one thing I told my wife to hold me to, and that is this. To give you a little background, we were on our way back from visiting the Niagara Peninsula in Canada and stopped on the way back in Westfield, New York, close to the lake at the Mogan David?
Yeah, Mogan David.
Mogan David Winery. I wanted to not only visit another winery, visit one that my non-wine drinking parents would serve with Thanksgiving dinner. A sweet Concord wine, delicious if you like it, as I did as a kid. Just a taste, not a glass or more, but cloyingly sweet to me now as an adult wine drinker. We stop, and the guard tells me to head inside, look around, take any pictures that I want, and stop by to see him on the way back out. As I'm heading out, I stop to say thanks to the guard. He then presents me with an entire case of pint-sized MD 2020. MD, affectionately known as Mad Dog. I want to say we're all very familiar with this.
Mad Dog 2020. Yep.
Wine bottles telling me it is a gift. He absolutely must have thought I was someone else. I refused the case, but after some conversation, accepted a bottle. The bottle in a plastic tube and case. Great flavor cigars sit on top display shelf in my wine and spirits room. Debbie knows to cut me off from all alcoholic beverages if I ever open and drink that bottle or light up that cigar. That's when you start to reach for the Mad Dog.
That's right.
You've gone too far.
You've
gone too far.
And the thing of it is, that was a Sunday when I got there, and the winery wasn't open. And I just went up to the garden. I said, I'd like to tour. He said, well, I'm supposed to tour. And he says, oh, of course you are. Yeah. Go on in.
Go on.
And I had the run of the whole daggone place. There was nobody in there.
Including a tour guide. You're like, well, the tour guides aren't here today, but you look like you know what's going on, so go ahead and mosey around. So we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to do some self-promotion here with a quick commercial trailer for one of my book, Sins of the Fathers. But when we come back, Fred is going to help me read one of my short stories, and I'll tell you a little about the short story. I actually really enjoy this one a lot. But so when we get back, he's going to help me read one of my short stories, and then I don't know, I may have to pry maybe a little bit more out of him before we let him go. So we will see you on the other end of this commercial.
Thank you.
Now you got to wait for me to push some buttons. Oh, please. All right, welcome back. Now, I did have a quick question for you. So, what is it about the letter D? Your wife's name is Deborah. Your daughters are Dana and Diane.
Yes.
And in case you didn't catch it from my description stuff, your middle initial is also
D. So, I was very fortunate to pick a wonderful wife, Debbie.
Mm-hmm.
And when we had our first daughter, we were trying to come up with a name. Actually, we were trying to come up with a name, whether it be a girl or a boy, and we came up with Dana. And of course, she was born, and then we realized, hey, there's Debbie and Dana and Dad.
Nice.
So the next daughter was Diane. And I'm actually junior. My father was also the same name, and actually his uncle was the same name, so he was named after his uncle.
Very nice.
And they used to, his uncle and family used to own a brewery in Defiance, Ohio until Prohibition.
Really?
Yeah. Defiance, Ohio, they owned a brewery, the Cubberly Brewery.
That's really cool.
It is.
And that's another story we're going to have to cover at some point.
Yeah.
Because again, that just sounds so interesting. I do have like my dad's first name. We have different middle names. Luckily, I wasn't a second or a junior because his middle name was Uvaldo.
Yes.
That would have been very difficult to go by. I don't know what kind of nickname it would have. We always used to make fun of his kids, like called him Uvaldo, which he, he still laughed, but I thought it hurt. Sorry, Dad. Sorry, we were young, but he was bald. And then my middle name is Antonio, so I went by Tony, and then Antonio is my writing. So because I actually knew I had some friends that were twins. They were Dana and Donna.
Oh.
So that's why I was wondering when you had yours also, Dana and Diane. I was like, are they twins? It's like it's not. And Deborah was the mom, and
so. And what was hilarious is when they were younger, they have lots of cousins, because Debbie had 5 brothers and sisters, and the cousins are all roughly the same ages. And when they were little, one of the cousins came to his mom and said, "How come both of Cubberly's daughters are named Dana Diane?" Because it was Dana Diane. Yeah, so they thought they both had the same name.
Oh my God. Actually, this is Dana Diane. This is Diane Dana.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Very easy to get confused, I know, but we really like those names. All right, so I'm going to do the narration, and Fred's going to help me with the voices. I really enjoyed it. I'm trying to remember like what was my inspiration with this one. I've always loved stories of alternate realities.
Yes.
I'm a big sci-fi geek. I've even got a tattoo of Darth Vader and Battlestar Galactica on my arm. I'm a big nerd, but I think I really enjoy this one. The whole idea of sci-fi. I don't write a lot of sci-fi because sci-fi is hard.
Yes.
I find horror is probably the easiest to write because really just whatever you don't think you should do, you write about, and that's horror. But sci-fi I find extremely difficult because then you got to create technologies. Fantasy it can be difficult, but I feel like there's enough. I feel like the hardest part I would have with fantasy would just be names. Not necessarily dragons and wizards. And there's like a certain step when it comes to sci-fi, you have to create forms of travel and stuff. So I don't really do a lot of sci-fi. But this one was fun. This one is a kind of a short sci-fi story.
And real quick,
yeah.
My mind works in mysterious ways. So I remember being at a dinner, a business dinner, where they were awarding a person from America with, it was called ICI Chemicals, Imperial Chemicals, out of England. They were the #2 largest company in the world at the time. And so in Williamsburg, they were actually going to honor somebody as Business Person of the Year for the Americas. And Isaac Asimov was going to be the speaker.
What?
A futurist.
What?
Isaac, and he was at the next table to us. And here's what I remember about Isaac Asimov. He would not fly. He would not ride a train. He would only go in a car, but it had to be a Volvo because that's the safe car.
Wow.
Okay? And guess how Isaac Asimov died?
Oh my God.
In a car wreck in a Volvo.
Oh my God, that chorus.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
And if you don't know who Isaac Asimov is, he's a big sci-fi writer. I imagine him. I mean, he was, died I think before my time. Before the 1970s, I think, wasn't it?
Yes. This was like mid-1980s.
Yeah, I almost feel like he was from the 1800s. Like you hear Isaac's name, Asimov.
Oh yes.
And you see the historical feature, from the past and stuff. He's the one that created the 3 laws, of robots and stuff.
Yes.
And some of his sci-fi stories. That's what he's most known for, is the 3 laws. But yeah. So wow, that would have been very interesting.
And then that very night, ICI had commissioned the people at Williamsburg. Now they play more colonial type music, dirges and ditties and all that. So they had composed a reel, and it was to honor the person that won the award. And it's called the Cubberly.
That's really impressive. Oh my God!
Yeah.
I love having him on the show. He's just so interesting. I mean, it's just like living the interesting life you live is not a competition, but
it is not.
It's definitely an inspiration to come across other people that have really are well traveled, well learned, and they're just, when you come across some person like that, I find everybody interesting. Everybody's got interesting stories. When you come across somebody who's just been traveling the world, has got stories like this, it just, oh my gosh, especially to a writer, it's just like every day's like Christmas. So.
And I got to tell you, before we start on this, I thoroughly enjoyed your first book that you gave me.
Oh, did you?
I think I sent you some notes on a couple of the stories because it was fabulous.
Yeah, I think I remember. I think I remember. That was a while ago, but yeah. Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed it thoroughly. My wife's reading some of them now as well.
Oh, very good. She's actually, I took the first story, Generational Killers, and actually expanded it to a 20,000 word novella. So she's actually beta reading it right now.
Oh, wonderful.
So hopefully in a couple weeks I'll get that back, and I'll actually go through and finalize it, and we'll actually have a 20 novella.
And you should go ahead and say she, because she is not my wife Debbie. She is.
Oh no, she is my girlfriend Leslie. She's off screen right there. That's why I keep pointing over there too.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's beta reading my my novella for that one too. But so yeah, I'm going back to all my stories and kind of expanding on because I really do. I mean, a lot of writers don't like their work. I don't really read my stuff a lot. But I go back and read some of the stories, and then I'll show here. And I tell you, some of these bring back memories. Like they're like,
yes,
they're parts of my life.
Right? I don't reread stuff out of my bourbon books and stuff for quite a while I write the next one, because it will influence the writing.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put the same thing down again.
Right.
I will tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, this guy's going to read it much better than me. So in order to help me, I have a little courage. and I have a little light inspiration.
This little light
I'm
of
ready.
mine.
This little light of mine.
All right, I'm going to do the narration, which is quite a bit. The first 2 pages are all narration, and then he's going to help me with the voices. All right, so.
And I've not looked at it before, so I'm going to be a mess.
And I haven't looked at it in years, so I'm going to try to remember some of the accents that I used to do, or some of the, well, I know he's doing the voices, but some of the things that were kind of behind. All right, here we go. Renato loved going to the museum, and since he had met Paulina, he looked forward to going to the museum even more. He walked past the crowds that were lining the walls enjoying their favorite paintings. There was a painting for every mood. Ronaldo showed up at the appointed time, and seeing that he arrived before her, pulled out his pad and wrote "Hi" on it. Since neither could hear the other, they wrote their conversations down for the other to see. The inability to hear connected them. He looked up and saw that she had shown up. He held up his pad, and she held up hers in response. "Hi" was written on her pad as well. They spent the afternoon talking. It was just the 2 of them, enjoying each other's company. As the afternoon gave way to early evening, they wrote their goodbyes and approached each other, close enough to hug. A sadness fell over them, like it did every time they were about to go their separate ways. They each placed their hands on their own side of the canvas, wishing the worlds were connected by more than just the ability to see each other. It had been more than 20 years since scientists were able to open viewers to other worlds and dimensions. At first, the ability to view one was one way, so they collaborated with artists from around the world and came up with the idea to create an art exhibit where humans could see other worlds as if they were looking at paintings. Many of the worlds and dimensions were so different from Earth that they even looked like they had been created by an artist. Some were filled with bright colors, some had different types of gravity, and some worlds had unexpected textures. Over time, the artists and scientists began giving the worlds names based on the way a world or dimension resembled historical artist works. Paulina was one from one of the Monet paintings. Her dimension was covered in beautiful country landscapes and full of colorful plants that resemble flowers. You kind of tell I was going through like an artistic phase. I think like everyone else, I did that like in the late 90s. There was between Monets and Monets and the Rembrandts and stuff. So yeah.
Well, when you talk about that, again, my mind wanders, so I start thinking about Tommy James and the Shondells. Monet, Monet.
Well, see, then my mind goes to Billy Idol and, and Moni Moni.
Yeah.
And see how that's how the creative mind works.
Yes.
It's just all over the place. You got to keep us focused. Let's see here. So even the inhabitants wore clothes very similar to the French clothing within Monet paintings. While most people were drawn to the Picasso or Dali worlds, worlds, Roberta always found the Monet, and Rembrandt worlds more serene. Those were like the Renaissance artists I was kind of studying at the time. I kind of start when I was writing this. One year, scientists from a parallel dimension, very similar to the one Ronaldo existed in, found a way to make the paintings two-way, and it wasn't long before other worlds were able to see Earth through the paintings of their own. While there were dozens of paintings that were two-way, there were still well over 100 that remained one-way, whether it was because the other world was not as technologically advanced or had not discovered a way to view other worlds yet on their own. These paintings were the truest form of the term paintings, as the worlds and dimensions were able to be viewed without the knowledge of the inhabitants of those worlds. Unfortunately, even with the worlds they were able to communicate with through various soundless means, they were never able to find a way to allow either side to hear each other, and over time, inhabitants from both sides merely moved on, content in only being able to view the other worlds and dimensions as before. Inhabitants from both sides started to see the inhabitants of the worlds they were viewing as bothersome, so it came to pass the world started viewing the paintings from their own side at times when the inhabitants of those paintings were not present. To appeal to the other worlds to continue viewing Earth, when the museum closed, they would place a screen over the paintings projecting images from cameras around the world, changing the destination daily. Now, as the patrons of Earth walked the hallways to enjoy the various paintings, except for those who were one way, most of them were only pictures of beautiful, otherworldly landscapes. Paulina's world was another version of Earth. Her calendar time period was the same as Ronaldo's, and much of her technology was similar, but they had remained fashionably locked in France's history. They spoke a variation of English, and much of their names for places and things were identical. Ronaldo was very lucky to have found and clicked with her one day as he was enjoying the various paintings. As an artist himself, he always enjoyed spending time at the museum. One day he was drawing a picture of Paulina's world when she had walked past, turning in curiosity at who was viewing them at that moment. Their eyes locked, and it was her that first waved. He shyly waved back. The first day, they weren't sure how to communicate, but they somehow managed to understand the message to meet at the same time the next day. They had both brought pads with them the second day, and though their languages were slightly different, they were able to convey their questions and answers. It wasn't long that they were both looking forward to talking to each other. They spent hours sharing pleasantries, describing their individual worlds, and eventually how they longed to find a way to meet in real life. Ronaldo knew that the scientists on Earth had never given up on trying to travel to these different locations. They simultaneously worked on space travel in an attempt to reach these planets, made easier by at least learning what direction they may be in. The alternate dimensions were the more difficult, but also the more likely winner in the race. While traveling between dimensions had never been done, the paintings had allowed to at least view them was at the very least a major step in the right direction. Each day when Ronaldo parted ways with Paulina, he would go to the next floor of the museum where the scientists worked around the clock, learning all they could to travel to these other worlds and dimensions. Ronaldo watched as she walked out of sight, as he did every day, and then immediately marched to the labs on the second floor to meet with his friend Stephen. Stephen lit up when he saw Ronaldo.
Ronaldo,
he called out when he saw him.
Come here, my friend. I have something amazing news.
Ronaldo had seen Stephen have it before, but nothing like this.
What's going on?
He asked.
We believe that we have found a way to transverse between dimensions.
Stephen exclaimed, barely able to contain himself.
What?
Ronaldo asked, adding to the excitement.
Yes.
Stephen continued.
The revelation came late last night, and all of our simulations have come back with positive results. We feel confident enough to attempt a link with another dimension as a real-world trial.
Ronaldo couldn't believe what he was hearing. His initial instinct was to recommend Paulina's dimension, but he decided to not risk it on the first trial. He knew if it worked, he would be on the top of the list to attempt a visit to her world. He also knew there would still be the need for further tests to ensure it was safe, and whatever travel to the other dimension could come back. While he was excited about all the things he would be able to show her, he also knew he would have to be patient. Being with her could still be months, if not years away. Unable to contain himself, he asked,
"How soon are you going to be able to make your first attempt? Since this, if of the utmost importance to the government,"
Stephen explained,
"we are to make our first attempt in 6 hours when the museum is closed and we're able to coordinate with the other side."
Ronaldo wished he had a way of telling Paulina, but he knew he wouldn't be able to talk to her until their appointed time the next day. He wasn't allowed on the second floor once it was time for them to make the first test. He had seen them take a painting with them to make the attempt, but he wouldn't know the results until Stephen was able to tell them. Ronaldo knew it was pointless to hang around waiting, but he was too excited to leave. Stephen had allowed him to crash in the room with a cot. It was around 2:30 in the morning. Ronaldo was suddenly woken by a series of alarms being set off. He jumped up and ran first to the lab, which he was still locked out of, and then to the first floor where the alarms were going off. His heart began to ache. All the paintings in the museum began to blink, static, return to normal, and repeat. He knew something was wrong, and his fear of losing connection to Paulina forever felt as if it was coming true. He wanted to run back to the second floor, bang on the door, and demand answers, but he knew it would be futile. All he could do was sit there and hope that each blink of the paintings would be the last. At some point he dozed off, still sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. He jumped when Stephen shook him awake. Before he even noticed Stephen, he saw that the painting had returned to normal.
"What happened?"
Ronaldo asked, wiping the sleepiness from his eyes. With a sad look, Stephen replied,
"We failed more than we could have ever imagined."
Ronaldo was confused.
"I don't understand. The paintings look normal."
Stephen knew what he had to say would be hard.
"They look normal for now, but they are actually beginning to fade," he said. "When we sent our first trial object, an inanimate object, a vase, it seemed to work fine. But when they passed the vase back, everything seemed to go haywire. Every mechanism we had in place began to go crazy. We have spent ever since trying to stabilize the connection once more. We were eventually able to restore the connection, or so we thought. But once we reviewed the data, We realized that the connections were slowly degrading, and not just the dimension we were collaborating with, but all the connections to the other worlds and dimensions as well.
Steven slid down the wall next to Ronaldo.
All of us are now trying to stop the degradation before the connections are completely gone, but it doesn't look promising.
They sat there for a brief moment before Steven looked back up.
I have to get back up to help the others,
He said.
I just had to step away to tell you what was going on. How long before the paintings have faded completely?
Ronaldo asked. Steven's face saddened even further.
By this time tomorrow, all the connections will be lost.
Ronaldo watched as Steven walked away and returned back to his dismay of knowing the next time he saw Paulina would be the last. Though he knew she wouldn't show until the point in time, Ronaldo stayed at her painting and waited. The clock ticked away with excruciating slowness. He looked at his watch and saw that he was only an hour away from that point in time when he once again felt Steven's hand on his shoulder.
Come with me now,
Steven said urgently.
What?
Ronaldo tried to ask, but barely got the question out as Steven half dragged him down the hallway and up the stairs. Once they were on the second floor, Steven stopped him and looked around to see where everyone was. Ronaldo was about to ask him what was going on, but Steven stopped him with a finger to the lips. Seeing the area clear, Steven led Ronaldo to an empty chamber and closed the door behind them.
All the scientists are occupied. So if we're going to do this, we need to do it now,
He said.
Do what?
Ronaldo asked.
I'm going to bring Paulina over before the paintings completely disappear.
Steven explained. Ronaldo couldn't believe what he was hearing. While he stood there dumbstruck, Steven went to the controls and with a push of a few buttons had Paulina's painting brought into the room. It wasn't long before Paulina arrived at the painting. Her way to Ronaldo was interrupted by her confusion on why Ronaldo's background looked different than he usually did. Ronaldo pulled out his notepad and caught her up in what was going on. The time had come to ask her to take the leap of faith and leave everyone and everything behind to join him there. A look of panic grew across her face, and then she slowly nodded. She asked if she had time to say her goodbyes, but one look from Steven informed them both that there wasn't. She was sad, but in love, so she nodded again and asked what she should do. Ronaldo looked at Steven for guidance.
All she has to do is...
Steven was cut off as there was a commotion at the door. He looked at the security camera and saw that the other scientists had discovered what they were trying to do and wanted to stop them.
They still think they can solve the problem before all the paintings fade.
Steven explained.
But I know better. We're down to minutes before we lose it all. And I want to see at least one person happy before it's gone.
All of a sudden, the door crashed open and scientists and security guards burst into the room.
Jump!
Steven yelled. Ronaldo knew what he had to do. He turned to look at Paulina and then charged towards the painting. Realizing what he was doing, she quickly moved out of the way as Ronaldo jumped through the frame and into her world. He stood up and looked back at the painting. Steven, the scientist, and the guards stopped what they were doing and stared at him, not believing what he had just done. Steven shook himself free and slowly walked to the painting. The two stared at each other through the frame, and as the view began to grow dark for the last time, Ronaldo waved a thank you to Steven. Steven was still waving her as Ronaldo and Paulina disappeared completely. The sudden realization of what had just happened dawned on Ronaldo, and fear crept in. All of his fear disappeared the moment Paulina threw herself into his arms.
Fantastic.
I feel like I'm reading a new story.
That's a lovely story.
Yeah, I really enjoy that. Like I said, I don't remember what the exact motivation behind that was, but yeah, sometimes I go back and read my stories like, yeah, it was pretty good.
That was pretty darn good.
I really kind of enjoyed it. I think we're coming to the end of stories for my first book too. I think we're already headed into volume 2, starting with the next few shows. So it's pretty exciting because I've actually been doing the show for about 3 years now,
awesome.
but I haven't really done it. Hasn't been consistent over the years. Obviously with the pandemic and everything else. But I've had a pretty good steady flow coming in. So what we're going to do is we're kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to move into the next commercial, which is the trailer for my volume 2, and then I'm going to come back with a couple announcements. And we're going to talk to him just a few more minutes, and then I shall release you to go about your night. So we're going to check out this other trailer real quick for my short story of Madman Volume 2, and then we'll say our sweet, sweet goodbyes. All right, see you in a minute. we are back. We're going to finish the night with another story or another reading from the sayings of my father, from Fred. But real quick, I do have a couple of announcements. First of all, you know how we do it, donate to a different charity every quarter. This charity that we're focusing on this quarter in June, July, and August is the Dayton PB&J Project. They raise money for and make sandwiches and snacks with peanut butter jelly for kids in the area and stuff. So a couple ways that you can force me to help is one, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. For every new subscriber between just that quarter, I will donate $1 to the charity. My new book, Short Stories from the Mind of a Madman, Volume 3 is now out. So any of my books, now I have 4 books out. I have my Sins of the Fathers, which is a mystery novel, and I have 3 short story compilation books. If you buy any of these books, for each dollar that comes from those will also be donated to charity, up to $100 for each one of those. And then I also have a new cybersecurity self-assessment book. So if you work for a company that needs to meet the CMMC 2.0 requirements, get that certification, should be coming out probably next year. This is a self-assessment book I created that those in IT and cybersecurity can get, so they can do their own self-assessment in their networks to make sure that when that certification comes, that they'll be able to do that. I also have a link in here to where you can get a Excel spreadsheet for actually making the self-assessment better. And each one of these that are sold to, also $1 will go in conjunction with the other book. And also, for each charity, I'm also getting the habit of creating a shirt. So I have this shirt that I created. I'm going to come forward a little bit so you guys can see. This one says, "That's an odd place to put peanut butter." It has a little dog on there. So you can go to my website and click on merch. And this is a charity shirt. All of them have different shirts for different reasons. And actually, if you buy any of my shirts, still donate $1. But this is what I call a perpetual one. So even after the quarter, anybody who buys one of these shirts over the next years or so, I'll donate 50 cents from each sale to the charity. Pretty much till the end of time. So just a couple of ways that you can help. Also, visit my page. I'll also have in this one the link to their charity, so you can go to directly to donate directly to them or contact them to see how you can help. So on that note, we are going to. I think you have one more.
I got one more thing I'd like to do real quick
before we say goodbye.
And I'll start by saying this: those of you who are watching. My goodness gracious, isn't it fantastic, the donations to charities and the support of charities? You know what, my father was, again, coming back to the book, Sayings of my father was a very generous man, and he thought that everybody should be generous. He always thought that we should give rather than having to face a situation where the government would take to give for us. Mm-hmm. We should be generous enough to give so that doesn't have to happen. So anyway, I've read to you a little bit about if you don't have stories to tell. So the next little story is regrets are the things you remember most. So before I read it, think about the story we just read. Ronaldo has no regrets. He left this world, but he has no regrets. He went after the love of his life. So if you have a regret, well, listen to the story. This really goes along with the previous topic, which again was if you don't have stories to tell. If there are things you really enjoy or are passionate about and miss out on them, it can cause regrets, some of which may haunt you for years. So I have 2 examples from my life that I want to share with you. The first is from my senior year in high school. During the late winter, during my junior year, I severely strained ligaments in my left ankle that put me in a cast for 16 weeks. I missed baseball that year because of it. Then in the fall, I started football practice. Now before this, I had been a starting middle linebacker. However, the pain and swelling of the ankle caused me to miss football my senior year. To this day, I regret missing that experience. I love the game and my teammates. And as you probably know, your senior year brings all of the recognition, not only for that year, but all the previous years. To be honest, I missed out on that as well. As to the other regret, I no longer have it. I always dreamed of writing a book that just might be a popular bestseller. Finally, at 70 years old, I published my first book, tasting 501 Century Bar, which made it to the #1 whiskey book on Amazon and #12 book overall. I've subsequently published other books. There is a lesson here. If you have a regret that you cannot put behind you by doing something about it, forget it. And if there's one that you can put behind you by doing something about it, get with it, do it. So at any rate, don't let regrets run your life. Do what Ronaldo did, take a jump.
You know that saying that when you die, you don't remember the things you did. You remember the things you didn't do. And along the same, that's kind of been our theme tonight. You know, that we've kind of talked about just from your stories and everything else, is that it's about, you know, living life. You know, and that's one thing I love about your books and stuff with the sayings, and that's where you kind of get from the stories, is that you really get the sense of the man who's went out there, who's traveled. You know, it's like people always a lot of times are impressed by what I do. They're like, oh man, you're writing and you're doing this.
Awesome.
I'm like, and that's because dreams are good, you know, but in order to make dreams come a reality, you have to do. It's like, you know, if you say you want to travel, travel.
Yes.
You know, if you say you want to write a book, write a book. If you say you want to, you know, give to charity, give to charity. It's like, stop saying you want to do stuff and do it. You know, just you get in a car, drive just 2 cities over, spend a weekend there. It's like travel doesn't have to be, don't save for that trip to another country.
I had a guy I was talking to about a month ago, and he was talking about charity giving, okay, being generous. And he said this: how many of you have ever dreamed of winning the lottery and what you could do to be generous?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the way to truly answer that is, what are you doing today?
Right.
Because if you're not doing anything today, you're highly unlikely to do anything with those millions.
And I have to say that's very true. Fred, thank you so much for joining me
Thank
again
you,
tonight.
Tony.
Thank you for
Loved
coming
it.
on. And we might have to have him on for a part 2, because I tell you, it's like, even if he doesn't publish another book, there's so much interesting stuff in this book. And this is your third one?
Third and fourth.
Third and fourth. Okay,
Yes.
so we had one on the bourbon, 2 bourbons.
2 bourbons. The second one was called the Whiskey Club Tastings.
Whiskey Club Tastings, and the 501
Tasting
Century.
501 to Century Bar.
And then we have the wine, and then we have the Sayings of My Father, all available on Amazon.
All on Amazon.
So make sure you go and take a look at those and support him, and you know, buy yourself a copy. And then hopefully Fred will get you on here again.
I'd love to come back.
Talk about some more of those adventures. I tell you, we just can't seem to get it under an hour because his stories are so fascinating. We can't stop listening. And I tell you, like I said, last time people really enjoyed it. I know people are going to be talking about this episode too, about how much they enjoyed it. So yeah, we'll have to bring you on again. So
Thank you, buddy. I
stuff.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming
Thank
on.
you. God bless you.
One more toast to Fred before we go.
And to Tony.
Yes, thank you for coming on the show. And we will see you all next time I have a guest. I don't have anybody's schedule right now. So as soon as I get someone scheduled, we'll see you again. I'll keep you posted. Have a good night, everyone.